James and Claire Thompson were the couple everyone admired until whispers of control, jealousy, and a single stormy night turned their perfect love into a chilling story of betrayal and blood. James and Claire Thompson were the kind of couple that made others believe in fairy tales. Their story began in a small town where chance meetings often felt like fate, and from the very beginning, people whispered that they were perfect for each other. James had the kind of confidence that made him stand out, a man who could walk into any room and hold attention without even trying. He worked as a contractor, building homes for others, shaping wood and stone into something lasting, something people could trust. Claire was softer in her presence, but no less remarkable. She taught young children at a local elementary school, filling her classroom with laughter and creativity. Together, they seemed to balance one another, his strength matched by her gentleness, his restless energy soothed by her quiet steadiness. Their marriage became a symbol in the neighborhood of what love was supposed to look like. They bought a charming two-story home with white siding and blue shutters, a house that seemed to smile. From the end of their street, Claire lined the porch with flower boxes, planting blooms that changed with the seasons, while James took pride in mowing the lawn until it looked like a green carpet rolled out to welcome visitors. Neighbors would wave as James left for work each morning, always in a hurry yet never too busy to offer a quick smile. In the evenings, Claire could often be seen returning from the school, her arms full of books and papers, her face lit with the joy of sharing her day with the children she adored. From the outside, everything was flawless. Their love was enviable, their life stable, and their home a reflection of it all. But the illusion of perfection is powerful, and it can blind even the closest observers to what lies beneath. For James and Claire, the cracks were small at first, nearly invisible. It began with long hours apart. James often explained his late nights by saying work had picked up, contracts needed finishing, clients were demanding. Claire, too, found herself staying later at school, telling others that lesson plans and grading left her buried in responsibilities. These explanations seemed reasonable, even admirable, yet they were only part of the truth. In reality, James was not always working, and Claire was not always teaching. They were both drifting, each hiding a side of their lives that didn't match the perfect picture others believed in. Friends began to notice changes. James, once the life of block parties and barbecues, no longer lingered to chat. He grew more distant, as if distracted by something just beyond reach. Claire, who had always been eager to share stories about her students, became quieter, her laughter less frequent. She smiled when expected, but it no longer reached her eyes. The shift was gradual enough to pass unnoticed by most, yet there were whispers that spread softly through the neighborhood. Some said James might be carrying too much pressure from work. Others suggested Claire's silence was simply exhaustion. But those who looked closer, those who paid attention to the way James's jaw tightened, or how Claire avoided eye contact, sensed that something was not right. Still, no one wanted to intrude. After all, the Thompsons had always been the couple others admired, and people preferred to keep believing in the story rather than confront the darker possibilities. Inside their home, the distance between James and Claire grew wider. They lived in the same space, but seemed to move on different paths, crossing only out of habit rather than affection. The meals they once shared at the kitchen table were replaced by quiet dinners eaten in separate rooms. The warmth that had once filled their home was cooling, like a fire left to burn down to embers. Yet to the outside world, nothing seemed amiss. Their house remained neat, their routines unbroken, their smiles still practiced. No one could see the shadows creeping in No one could guess that behind the flowers on the porch and the freshly painted shutters, something dangerous was beginning to take shape. The perfect love story was still being told to anyone who looked from the outside, but inside, the first pages of a darker story were being written, one that would eventually stain their lives in ways no one could have imagined. The cracks in James and Claire's marriage, once subtle and easy to dismiss, began to widen in ways that could no longer be ignored. What had started as a quiet distance now grew into something cold, sharper, and far more dangerous. James was no longer simply a husband returning home from a long day of work. He was a man whose presence filled the house with tension, the kind of tension that makes every sound feel louder and every silence feel heavier. His temper, once controlled, began to surface in small but unmistakable ways. The slam of a door, the snap of a sentence, the clenched fists at his sides, these were signs of a storm that was no longer hidden. Claire felt it before anyone else. Her world, which had once felt like a safe harbor, became an environment where she walked carefully, measuring each word, each movement, as though stepping across a fragile bridge that could collapse beneath her at any moment. Friends noticed the change in her. She declined invitations with polite excuses, preferring to stay home where she claimed she was just tired. The vibrant woman who used to laugh easily and fill conversations with warmth was fading, replaced by someone quieter, more cautious, as though her energy was being drained away. Her sister Emily saw it most clearly. On phone calls, Claire's voice trembled in ways she tried to disguise. She never said outright that she was afraid, but her pauses spoke louder than words. She would mention how James seemed suspicious of her comings and goings, how he checked where she had been or who she had spoken to. Emily urged her to visit more often, but Claire always hesitated, reluctant to push boundaries that had grown dangerously rigid at home. James, for his part, began to change in ways that unsettled even those who barely knew him. Once the dependable neighbor who offered to help fix a fence or lend a tool, he became withdrawn. People noticed him watching from the porch rather than engaging, his eyes following Claire more closely than before. At gatherings, when he did attend, his smiles looked forced and his conversations short. He began to show traits that others couldn't name, but instinctively recoiled from a hardness in his face, an edge in his voice. Inside the house, the walls seemed to absorb the tension. Claire spent more time in the spare bedroom under the pretense of grading papers, a fragile attempt to create space between herself and the man she had once trusted with her life. James prowled through the rooms at odd hours, checking on things that didn't need checking, opening drawers and cupboards, as though searching for hidden secrets. What began as jealousy had transformed into full paranoia. Every phone call Claire made, every message she sent, was shadowed by his suspicion. The perfect love story was unraveling, and yet from the outside, it was still carefully disguised. The flower boxes on the porch were still full, the lawn still perfectly trimmed, the shutters freshly painted. Appearances remained intact, even as the inside of the house was suffocating under the weight of fear. Neighbors continued to wave when James left for work, but no one saw the way Claire lingered at the window, staring out as if the world beyond her street was slipping further and further away from her grasp. By this point, Claire had begun to plan small acts of resistance. She hid envelopes of money, tucked away in corners of the house where James would not think to look. She gathered important documents quietly, slipping them into folders she could quickly grab if the chance to escape ever came. But every time she imagined walking out the door, she felt the pull of fear tighten around her. She knew James would not let her go easily, The people closest to them would later remember the subtle warnings. Emily spoke of conversations that ended with Claire's voice breaking into silence. Neighbors remembered Claire's absence at gatherings that she once would have attended without hesitation. But no one could have guessed just how dangerous the situation had become. The distance that began as two people drifting apart had now hardened into something darker, something that was no longer about love or even anger. It was about control, possession, and a determination on James's part that if he could not keep her willingly, he would ensure she never left at all. The unraveling was nearly complete, though the outside world still saw only fragments. What no one realized was that the story had already passed the point of return. The storm that had been building in their house was about to break, and when it did, the consequences would reach far beyond the walls of their home. The night that changed everything arrived without warning. The sky had been heavy all day, swollen with clouds that promised rain. By evening, the storm broke, thunder rolling through the neighborhood, rain lashing against windows, and wind rattling the shutters of the Thompson home. To the neighbors, it was just another summer storm, but inside that house, a far more violent storm was beginning to unfold, one that would leave scars no weather could match. Claire had spent weeks quietly preparing to leave. She knew James was growing more unstable, his suspicion deepening into something unrelenting. She had hidden cash in envelopes, packed small essentials in a bag she kept tucked away in the back of her closet, and collected her documents with the precision of someone who knew that one wrong step could expose everything. She had even confided in Emily, not with words that admitted danger outright, but in subtle hints that made her sister uneasy. That night, she decided the time had come. She waited until James had gone upstairs, his footsteps heavy and deliberate, before creeping toward the drawer where her documents lay. The rain masked the small sounds she made, but it could not disguise the weight of her fear. James, however, was not asleep. He had long since begun to sense that Claire was keeping something from him. His paranoia had grown into a need to search through her belongings, convinced she was planning to betray him. Earlier that evening, he had stumbled across one of her hidden envelopes of cash. The sight of it had ignited something inside him that went far beyond jealousy. It was rage, cold and consuming, the kind that made his hands tremble and his thoughts spiral. When he heard the faint sound of drawers opening downstairs, he knew she was leaving. What followed was sudden and merciless. The neighbors, later questioned, admitted they heard shouting that rose above the storm. It was muffled, broken by thunder, but unmistakably fierce. Some claimed they heard something heavy fall, a thud that seemed out of place in the rhythm of the rain. No one acted, though. Everyone assumed it was just an argument, the kind couples had behind closed doors, the kind no one wanted to intrude upon. But this was no ordinary fight. Claire's fear became reality as James confronted her, his rage exploding in a way she had only ever imagined. The bag she had packed was discovered, the envelopes of money torn open, her documents scattered across the floor. The illusion of safety shattered, leaving her trapped with a man who was no longer just jealous, but dangerous beyond reason. What happened next was quick, brutal, and irreversible. The storm outside roared as though to hide what was taking place. Within the walls of their home. By morning, the street looked calm again. The storm had passed, leaving the air clean and still. But something was wrong. Claire's car sat in the driveway, untouched. Curtains were drawn tightly across the windows, unusual for a family that typically let the morning light pour in. When neighbors asked James where Claire was, his explanation was simple: she had left in the night. He said it with a flatness that made some uneasy, but his words seemed plausible enough. After all, couples fought. Sometimes people needed space. Yet, small details began to unravel his story. Claire's purse remained in the house. Her phone, always by her side, was found on the counter. Even her keys were still in the bowl by the front door. It was as though she had vanished without taking a single thing she would need. And then came the discovery that would transform suspicion into certainty. Police, alerted by concerned family members when Claire failed to appear at school, searched the house. Their eyes caught on something unusual, a faint stain beneath the rug in the living room. When lifted, it revealed a smear of blood, barely visible, but impossible to ignore. Traces continued downward, toward the basement, faint but undeniable. The house that had once stood as a symbol of love was now marked by evidence of violence. For those who stood outside that day, watching officers move in and out of the Thompson home, the scene was chilling. They had seen this couple as the picture of devotion, their lives a model of stability. Yet behind the closed door of that white house with blue shutters, the perfect story had ended in horror. The night that began with thunder and rain had left behind something far darker than a passing storm. It had left a mystery, a disappearance, and whispers that would never be silenced. Detectives began their search of the Thompson home with the careful precision that comes from years of uncovering truths hidden behind everyday walls. At first glance, the house revealed little. The living room was neat, the furniture arranged as if waiting for guests, the kitchen spotless except for a coffee mug left in the sink. Yet the faint bloodstain under the rug, once revealed, was enough to transform the scene from ordinary to ominous. It told them one thing with certainty: something violent had taken place here, something James could no longer deny. When confronted, James repeated the same explanation he had given to neighbors. Claire had left in the middle of the night, frustrated. After an argument, he claimed he had no idea where she had gone. His tone was flat, his words rehearsed, as though he had practiced them in front of a mirror. But the detectives were not convinced. They noticed the small inconsistencies, the way he hesitated when asked about the timeline of the night, the way his eyes shifted when they mentioned the stain beneath the rug. His story had too many holes, and the house itself seemed determined to reveal the truth. The search moved upstairs, where Claire's belongings told a story of their own. Her purse, filled with her wallet, identification, and cards, sat on the dresser. Her phone, still plugged into its charger, rested on the nightstand. Shoes she often wore were neatly lined by the door. None of it matched the picture James was trying to paint of a woman who had walked away. It looked instead like a woman whose life had been suddenly interrupted. Deeper investigation uncovered Claire's attempts to prepare for escape. Hidden envelopes of cash were found tucked behind books and inside drawers. Folders containing important documents were discovered in unusual places, as though hastily hidden. To the detectives, these were not signs of a woman leaving in anger, but of one carefully planning her freedom. Each envelope was a silent cry for help, each hidden paper proof of a desperate intention she had not been able to carry out. Attention then turned to the basement. Officers followed the faint traces of blood leading downward, each step amplifying the dread of what they might find. Behind a stack of boxes, hidden away as though meant to be forgotten, they uncovered the most devastating evidence of all. Claire's body was found, her life cut short in the very home where she had once built dreams of a happy future. The basement, once a place for storage, had become a tomb. The discovery shattered the image of the Thompsons that the neighborhood had clung to. The couple that had symbolized love and stability had been hiding a nightmare. Detectives pieced together the events of that stormy night with chilling clarity. Claire had been preparing to leave, and James had found out. His jealousy, sharpened by paranoia, had turned into uncontrollable rage. What happened in those final moments was brutal, an act of violence fueled by the belief that if he could not control her, he would not allow her to escape. The investigation revealed yet another layer of betrayal. Financial records showed that James had recently taken out a large life insurance policy on Claire, one that would have left him with a significant payout in the event of her death. It was not just obsession that had driven him. Greed had been woven into the fabric of his crime. What neighbors had mistaken for love had been possession and calculation, masked by a charming smile and the facade of a perfect marriage. News of the discovery spread quickly through the community, leaving people reeling. Neighbors who had waved to James each morning, who had admired the flowers Claire planted on the porch, now stood at their windows in disbelief. The house at the end of the street no longer looked like a place of warmth and stability. It had become a symbol of something far darker, a reminder that appearances can hide truths more horrifying than anyone dares to imagine. As James was led away in handcuffs, reporters gathered outside, their cameras capturing the fall of a man once seen as devoted and reliable. Behind him, the house stood silent, its blue shutters closed tight as though trying to keep the world from seeing the darkness inside. The secrets had been revealed, and there was no turning back. The love story that had begun with such promise had ended in blood, its chapters written in fear, betrayal, and tragedy. The truth, at last, was undeniable. The trial of James Thompson became the center of attention in the small town, drawing people who had once admired him and Claire, now desperate to understand how such horror could have unfolded behind their perfect facade. The courtroom filled each day with reporters, curious locals, and grieving family members. The air carried a mixture of sorrow and anger, the weight of what had been lost hanging heavily over everyone who sat to hear the proceedings. For Claire's family, every moment was a reminder of what had been taken from them, a life cut short in the cruelest way possible. The prosecution painted a clear picture of James's actions and intentions. They laid out the hidden envelopes of cash Claire had collected, the carefully stored documents that proved she was planning to leave, and the financial records showing the life insurance policy James had taken out just months before her death. The evidence was stacked with devastating precision, each piece building upon the next until there was no doubt left about what had happened in the Thompson home. The story of a man driven by jealousy was dark enough, but when paired with greed, it revealed something even more chilling: a husband who had turned his wife's love and trust into a weapon. Witnesses testified to the changes they had seen in Claire. Her sister Emily spoke of their last conversations, of how Claire had grown fearful and hesitant, of how her voice had carried the weight of secrets she never fully revealed. Neighbors recounted the shift in her presence, the way her once bright personality had dulled, the way she seemed to disappear from the gatherings she had once enjoyed. Each testimony built a portrait of a woman trapped in a life she no longer felt safe in, and of a man determined to keep her at any cost. James sat silent throughout much of the trial, his face expressionless as the evidence was laid before him. Some in the courtroom searched his features for regret, for a flicker of sorrow, but they found nothing. His silence became its own statement, a chilling confirmation of the control and coldness that had defined his final acts toward Claire. When the jury deliberated, the outcome was swift. The verdict of guilty echoed through the room, a single word that carried both justice and heartbreak. Claire's family wept, holding one another as the weight of the decision settled over them. The community, too, felt the impact. The trial had stripped away the illusions they had once believed, leaving behind the stark reality of how easily love can be twisted into something deadly. In the weeks that followed, Claire was remembered, not for the way her life had ended, but for the way she had lived. Former students brought flowers to her grave, some leaving small notes about how she had inspired them. Colleagues at the school shared stories of her patience, her kindness, and her ability to make every child feel seen. Her family held vigils, their candles glowing in the night, each flame a symbol of her light that could not be extinguished by violence. The house where it all happened stood quiet, its shutters closed, its porch flowers long since wilted. For some time, it remained empty, a silent monument to the tragedy that had unfolded within its walls. Neighbors avoided looking directly at it, their eyes sliding past as if pretending it wasn't there could ease the memories it carried. Eventually, it was sold, painted over, and made to look ordinary again. But for those who knew the truth, its history could never be erased. The story of James and Claire became a warning whispered among the town, a reminder that appearances can be deceiving, that what seems perfect may be hiding darkness beyond comprehension. It was a story of love that began with promise, but ended in destruction, of trust turned into betrayal, of a woman whose courage to escape was met with unspeakable cruelty. In the end, it became clear that their marriage had never been the love story it appeared to be. It was something far more haunting, a love story written in blood. And though James was locked away, serving the sentence for the life he had stolen, the shadow of his actions lingered. For Claire's family, for her community, and for anyone who looked too closely at the house with the blue shutters, the reminder was everlasting. Sometimes the darkest tragedies are born in the places that look the safest.